I think we see a lot of value in our customers when they leverage TransUnion for a graph. They're not only helping connect their data to their media platforms, which allows addressable targeting at scale, but they also benefit from the full breadth and depth of our graph, which allows them to increase the number of matches. They basically find more of their targeted individuals across the relevant platforms.
I'm thrilled today to have our guest, Gareth Davies, on the podcast here today. Gareth joins us from TransUnion, where he's serves as their head of product and SVP of product. Gareth, welcome to the show. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jason. Good to be on here. I've been a long-time listener. My name's Gareth Davies. I lead product for all marketing across the TransUnion portfolio, everything outside of our measurement business. So excited to be here and talk all things identity and data.
Fantastic. And for listeners of the show, maybe you guys could start talking a little bit about TransUnion and sort of the brand Neustar that I'm sure other listeners will be familiar with if they're not as familiar with TransUnion. Maybe you guys sort of give a bit of context and history on the business and sort of exactly some of the things that you guys do are, and then we'll dive into our core topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been an exciting journey. Neustar was acquired by TransUnion a little over a year, about 18 months ago. And really, Neustar had grown. There was a combination of marketing services, fraud, and communications. And the backbone of Neustar was really identity. They had built a really phenomenal footprint of high quality, precise, consent-driven data, and then the technology and intelligence to build identity resolution services and ultimately help the largest marketers, but also folks within fraud and more broadly across IT to build a robust first-party understanding of identity. And from there, a suite of measurement and analytics and audience management products for marketers evolved. And then TransUnion, emerging from being a credit bureau, expanding and leveraging that first-party customer footprint from a data perspective, the combination of marketing capabilities that TransUnion had acquired and built over the years came together really with Neustar. And so now we power a decent chunk of the world's largest marketers, technology platforms, agencies, data providers, and we really help them stitch together a precise and scalable view of customer identity and give them the data and the tools to drive more intelligent analytics, insights, targeting, activation, measurement, the full life cycle of data-driven addressable marketing.
Got it. Yeah, that's thank you for that, Gareth. And when I sort of look at the broader set of challenges around identity, there's a very big technology landscape. TransUnion and Neustar come with both software solutions and, of course, a best-in-class data asset. For someone who doesn't understand the space that well, you can look at all these pieces and say, "Oh, wow, this is super complex." And Gareth and I were catching up the other day, and I don't think there's few people in the industry, the world for that matter, who understand these problems better than Gareth. And we were just reminiscing around. Hey, it might be great to actually just do an episode of the show where we take a step back and say, look, for everyone who's been exposed to this, and certainly anyone in marketing who has had a degree of exposure to identity graphs and identity problems and identity opportunities. But putting all the technology and the architecture aside for a second, we wanted to focus today's show on really, in some sense, a back to the basics type of orientation. And look, what are the three things that every marketer just must understand and must know, about identity today? And really, where does this all drive in terms of an outcome that you can quantify from a revenue perspective, from a ROAS perspective, from a customer experience perspective, and from an end-to-end results perspective? So that's really, what we're looking to distill today. Take all this, high-powered, complex technology, complex data graphs, incredibly thoughtful approaches, and category opportunities which are wide, diverse, and complex within themselves, and really just distill into those three simple things. But maybe just kicking off, Gareth, before we talk about these sort of 3 points of value, maybe you can give us a quick breakdown of the category at the highest level. How TransUnion fits in with other category providers. And I know it's sort of a big ask to distill the category in a few minutes, but if you were to break it down just into a few broad boxes, what would that be? And what's the simple frame?
Sure. So, I think I'll start by very quickly defining what I think identity is, and then we'll talk about how vendors and where does TransUnion sit in that ecosystem. So, really at the core, and I think you mentioned the basics. The principles are really, the first principles are very, very simple. Marketers and the enterprise more broadly, in order to deliver customer-centric, personalized experiences, whether that's on-site, in-app, digital commerce, retail, offline, across the ad ecosystem. There's a need for marketers to have a deep understanding of who their customers are and to be able to reach them wherever they may be. And obviously to be able to optimize and tune the messaging for the right outcome. And the key to that is really identity, which is, I think, by means of definition, it's understanding who an individual or a household is, right? Maybe if I'm a CPG and I'm in the cereal category, I care more about the buying patterns of a household than I do the individuals in the household. So the North Star of my identity graph, my kind of data pinnacle would actually be the household. And behind it, I want to understand who the individuals are and all their associated devices. So whichever way, whether we put the individual or the household at the top of the pyramid, it's effectively establishing an understanding of a known individual in a persistent and consistent way, where you can attribute anything from known PII information, so all the traditional CRM stuff, name, address, email, phone, etc., as well as digital identifiers. So I want to know which devices and corresponding device identifiers and cookies, whilst we still have them, although they're fleeting. Connected TV environments, right? I want to be able to ascribe and connect devices back to individuals and households, as well as tie event level behavioral data, ad exposure data. The identity becomes a cluster and the scaffolding upon which you can apply all that other rich behavioral and advertising and marketing campaign level data. So at the core, it may look different from a technical perspective. Where the data is stored and how it's managed may look different for different marketers. But at the core, it's effectively a database that has either an individual or a household and has a bunch of different data, including demographic and other attribute level data appended to it. So that's how I think about identity. If I come at it from a CRM lens, that's very different from a digital marketer that cares about device identifiers. The shape and the construct of the graph may be a little different, but that's really the core. And so when I think about the outcomes, marketers are building these data assets so that, number one, they can generate insights. Often there isn't a golden record necessarily within the enterprise. So I may have a ton of event level data coming from my apps, my mobile sites, from commerce, from offline event level data, from my partners. And I don't have a good way of stitching it all together so I can start exploring it. And so we often see identity as the first foundation of bringing that data together. And in that world, if it's kind of PII, then you also see the axioms and the epsilons and the experience, the kind of guys that have had a long footprint of offline data. Whereas if I'm then trying to bring that CRM and tie it to device identifiers, to mobile ad IDs, to cookies for, CTV IDs, for example, then we talk about the onboarding category. That's where someone like alongside Newstar, you would see a LiveRamp. There's a couple of other vendors. That world has consolidated over the last 5 to 7 years. And these onboarding vendors specialize in bridging the gap between offline and online and really just stitching those IDs together. And then, of course, you've got a rich array of third-party data providers and measurement providers that have, rich attribute level data. So we see vendors in different categories. I think we tend to find folks come to us when they're going through a multi-year digital transformation. They're building their data assets from the ground up, and they don't want to have tons of different point solutions. They want to have a technology and data infrastructure they can build on.
That was incredibly helpful. Why don't we dive into sort of the 3 core points of value? Starting with the first one that I'll maybe describe at a high level, and then Gareth, you can sort of provide additional context, and that's really customer insights. And I think with each one of these points of value, I think people may ask, how is this related to identity? I have my customers, they each have an email address. Why can't I just join on that? And the fact of the matter is look, if the world of customer insights depends on really your ability to understand your customer in various contexts. Whether that context is via sending them an email, or whether it's how they browse anonymously, or whether it's how they're targeted on the open web. Each one of these represents a different form of customer identity. And if you're trying to understand how your customers interface with your ads in the open web, you may be a clean room, you need a very different way of representing their identity than if you're trying to understand how they engage with your email and CRM program. Or how do you characterize the nature of the support requests you get through your support center. Each one of these, it's the same customers, but they're interfacing with their business in very different ways. And your ability to drive insights around which type of customers are the most dissatisfied with the product, in my support center, being able to understand that requires bridging those identities across the different touch points, so you can really understand customers' behavior and their reactions across how they engage digitally, across offline, across support, and beyond. So Gareth, maybe you can sort of talk about that and what you guys are seeing around the market, around insights.
Yeah, I think what's exciting is that we've evolved from an insight and measurement framework that is largely ad-driven. So, 5-7 years ago, folks were most concerned about saying, I've spent X number of dollars on either a Google or a Meta, Twitter, one of the major media platforms, or across a range of publishers that I bought through programmatic advertising across the open web. And now I want to basically measure the effectiveness of those ad campaigns to measure return on ad spend. And that may be because I just don't have a direct, immediate line of sight between ad exposure and on-site purchase, or increasingly today between digital ad exposure and offline retail sales. And so I want to be able to tie the conversion event level data at the end of the flow back to that original ad impression, and clearly ascertain where my most effective media planning and where ads are ultimately driving conversions. And I still think that's a critical piece of the marketer's equation. But what's been exciting, I think, with the rise of the cloud data warehouse, with CDPs, with an expanded scope of analytics within the modern marketer and kind of enterprise analytics function, we're seeing a much more wide-ranging set of queries and questions being asked of customer data. So to your point, folks are trying to understand and build, interesting cohorts of users and run analytical queries on folks that drop off on abandoned carts, or how is behavior on a certain site leading to some other event that I care about through another owned and operated property. And obviously, to do that, you're inherently dealing with an identity challenge. You typically have a disparate set of identifiers. So in your own environment, you may have an authenticated user with email, but then you see them again and you actually don't see them. You have a non-logged in user, right? And you have a cookie and you have no way of linking them back. Or in many cases, I was with a leading auto manufacturer the other day. They have 300 internal sources of first-party customer data. And that data is inherently siloed, all keyed off different primary keys within different databases, because this data has been, captured basically by different teams for very different reasons. And there hasn't been an identity architecture laid out at the beginning, which means that what you have is a lot of interesting data at the margin, at the edge, but there's no way of linking it all together because you have various keys that are really fragments of an individual identity, or there's some sort of enterprise key and there's no way of tying it. And so I think where identity comes in is it helps marketers, first off, de-silo, unify, and connect the data they have within their own organization. And often that will be a kind of a known identity problem. I want to tie typically CRM related data. I've got email, I've got phone, I've got postal, I've got different fragments. Maybe I've got 2 or 3 different emails, and I think they're all Jason Davis, but there's some variance here. And I've got moderately high confidence, but I'm not sure if I'm trying to drive a personalized campaign, if it's sufficiently confident, right? And so typically there's the challenge of unifying. And then that, once unified, it enables analytics. So whether that's a SQL query on top of the data in a data warehouse like a Snowflake or a BigQuery, whether it's within a BI stack, for example, or whether it's directly in our world, directly within the TransUnion stack, customers are increasingly, whether it's a SQL-based query or it's just a UI, they're pulling insights from the data tied to that omni-channel view of the user, and that's really the starting point.
Yep. No, it's really some great points there. And I'll just sort of highlight a very, very simple use case. We've done a few episodes this year around attribution. And Google would love for you to believe that all your customers do is click on a Google ad and then buy digitally. And while some of your customers may do that, others may click on an ad, may click on other ads, and then may eventually buy in store, or through other channels. And from an insights and analytics perspective, your ability to develop a robust identity model of your customer, is a requirement to actually do that, do that kind of attribution. So how many customers clicked on a Google ad and then made a purchase in store within 7 days? That's both incredibly valuable from an insights perspective, just to ask, what's my omni-channel behavior, which we'll get to our next point of value. And then obviously from a ROAS perspective is also a really important question to answer as well.
100%. I mean, I think that forms the foundation of multi-touch attribution, and that's a big part of our measurement and analytics business. Because not only do you want to see that event occurred 7 days later, you want to understand all the other media and consumer touch points that happened on that journey, and then weight the relative contribution, because you don't always know which of those media placements actually drove that end conversion, right? Because Google will tell you one thing, but Twitter or Snap will tell you something else. And so ultimately you have to decode that journey and determine what the right allocation of media spend is moving forward. So yeah, spot on. Without identity, you're nowhere.
100%. So with multi-touch attribution as sort of the segue into value point number 2, value point number 2 is actually a bit more obvious, and that's the ability to model customer identity properly. Is critical to execute on an omni-channel strategy. And this one is sort of the gimme, the throwaway, the obvious one, but there's real nuance that I think is worth discussing for at least a few minutes. But if you look at if you have 10 customers and they use your web experience and they also shop in store, and they also interface with your ads. And if you can't actually associate them, then it'll look like you have 30 customers. And each one of those customers, you'll then develop a customer 360 around with 30 profiles. You'll target them separately, and they'll also be each be subjected to 3 completely different views of who they actually are. And while you will be executing an omnichannel strategy, it won't be a connected omnichannel strategy. So ultimately, doing this effectively is being able to make these associations. So I could ramble on forever on this, Gareth, but maybe I'll let you kick off with some key concepts that are required to do this right.
Well, I think the good news is the concepts are pretty consistent, and so I think about marketers where they are. There's typically some degree of a spectrum between data maturity and data richness, right? So those that are data mature are typically several years into their kind of addressable customer-centric data strategy and journey. And typically these are organizations that have already transitioned largely to the cloud. They've got some kind of robust first-party data strategy via the CDP, via the cloud data warehouse, some combination of both. And they've typically got in-house analytics and data scientists that are supporting their marketing team at really kind of delving deeply into the data, right? And there are others that are a little earlier on that journey, right? In fact, most, I would argue, are earlier on that journey. And then there are those brands that are inherently data rich because they have a really rich first-party authenticated view of their customers. So think financial services, think in many cases retail, particularly D2C and e-com. There are a number of verticals, right? Where there are others like CPGs that can be very sophisticated, but they may just not have that own first-party footprint. So I think first and foremost, when it comes to omnichannel, there's the type of organization and therefore the blueprint for what the data strategy and architecture will actually look quite different. But I think the principles are the same, whether it's your own data or partner data. And by partner data, I think of both second and third party data, because many of the CPGs have spent the last 40 odd years leveraging the Nielsen's of the world and others to build panel based third party demographic data that's kind of scaled up at a national census level, representing a kind of a national distribution of individuals. And that's kind of one approach to kind of understanding who your customer is and then using that to inform your omnichannel strategy. Whereas, others that are more first-party data rich will have known authenticated users across their own, e-commerce sites, across their apps. Maybe they're leveraging a clean room, and so they're accessing second-party retailer data. They'll have a very different data asset. But at the core, it's really about just bringing my own data, whether it's ad, campaign level data, site data, purchase data, and then any array of second or third party data that I need together to create and enhance this single view of the customer. And then once I've typically run my analytics, that's often the precursor. I need to have some sort of insight before I can take action. I can then start constructing campaigns and building my targeting logic such that whether I'm operating an own campaign, I'm sending an email, for example, or an in-app push notification to a consumer that may have abandoned cart, or whether I'm prospecting for new customers across the open internet and delivering ads, I can start to understand who the individual is, where they are on that journey, and I can start to funnel individuals into cohorts and to patterns of behavior that I know are going to lead ultimately to some positive consumer response and ultimately to a conversion. So I think whilst the simplistics are like the basics are there, you need to know who they are, and then you need to be able to reach them. The actual strategies are near infinite, and that's what's exciting.
Yeah, no, and on the technology side, the right mix of providers that can bring the right third-party data assets and the right identity stitching algorithms. It's sort of like putting a puzzle together.
Yes.
Customer, you have you probably don't have 1,000-piece puzzle, but a 15-piece puzzle across the different areas that and touch points that they affect on the business. Your ability to execute an omnichannel strategy starts with your ability to understand the different pieces of this puzzle and how they fit together. And then once they fit together, the omnichannel strategy, you have all the foundations in place for execution.
Yeah, and I go back to that auto manufacturer example, 300 internal stores of enterprise customer data and over 100 marketing vendors and technologies being leveraged to drive full omni-channel marketing campaigns. It's potentially overwhelming to have that amount of first-party data, and unifying all of that, I think, is a challenge. So oftentimes, I think the pragmatist, in you emerges, and you say, where are the top, 10 to 15 or 20 sources, right? And that is often the starting point. But absolutely, it's how do you bring that together, derive insight, and use it to inform the campaign strategy.
Great. And let's get to our third and final high-level point of value. And again, the full disclaimer, this is a whirlwind tour and not an exhaustive enumerative set of points of value where a world-class identity strategy can push your brand and your business. But really the third point of value that we'll be talking about today is really around increasing the reach of your ad strategy and optimizing ROAS. Third-party cookies are changing in a way that is highly disruptive. And ultimately, being able to understand how your customer base today, and how your prospect base and set today fits into a broader ecosystem of UUIDs and other identifiers in the open web, is really critical, to be able to properly target, both net new and also retarget and develop lookalikes for that matter from the best that you have, the best customers you have today. So Gareth, maybe you can sort of talk about some of the trends there, because this is a very, very wide topic with many opportunities. But maybe we can sort of spend a few minutes talking about it.
You bet. I mean, I think you nailed it. Hard to talk about addressable. I define it really as addressable advertising, the ability to reach an individual or a household on a persistent and known basis, and then of course be able to measure the effectiveness of campaigns off the back of that. That's really the foundation of addressable marketing. And I think I'd go back to kind of 2007 to Right Media and DoubleClick and all these companies that kind of emerged out of the ad network boom of the early aughts and transformed programmatic advertising into this kind of known addressable based targeting foundation. And fast forward to today, you've got advertisers that have pretty robust programmatic and addressable ad strategies, and they've already seen up to 30% of their addressable inventory disappear given the Safari, Firefox shenanigans of the last couple of years. And now, obviously, with Chrome, Google just re-announced about 10 days ago the sunsetting of third-party cookies in Chrome next year. And so I think, we've known for a while that the shoe's about to drop on cookies. I think questionable on the mobile device ID, but I think, as a betting man, I'd say that both third-party mobile ad IDs as well as potentially the IP methodology of targeting connected TV households is all questionable in the future state. And so, candidly, there's no silver bullet. No matter what any vendor may say, there is no definitive answer to addressable advertising post-cookie. There's interesting R&D happening. Google's got their privacy sandbox. People are exploring ways of identifying individuals with client-side first-party identifiers. There's all types of interesting stuff happening. But at the core, we're seeing those with a first-party addressable customer footprint really win, right? Those that have authenticated users, whether that's a marketer, whether that's a publisher or a media platform. If you have logged in users and you can deliver explicit notice and consent, chances are consumers will opt in to relevant personalized experiences, including personalized ads, provided the value exchange is there. So just one thing I'll say quickly is that I think whilst people will talk about how to mitigate the deprecation of cookies, there's not enough talk about how do I deliver truly value-adding experiences to end consumers such that they confidently and willingly authenticate and share data. And so what's exciting about the deprecation of these IDs is that ultimately it's creating a new value exchange between consumers and marketers. It's forcing folks to reassess what kind of data they capture from whom, for what use cases, and that ultimately, I believe, will yield better consumer outcomes, which will lead to better, more effective advertising strategies. But to go back to your question, marketers are still trying to reach. They're desperate for reach, right? And as much as we want to talk about hyper-personalized campaigns on a one-to-one basis, if you talk with the world's leading CPG and beauty and tech and other brands, right, it's often reaching scaled cohorts of consumers. And to do that, you need to create an identity sync between your data and the media platform's data, whether that's through the DSP, you're buying ads on the trade desk or wherever, or you're buying directly with a Roku or a Twitter or a Snap or a Facebook, whomever. You need to create a join. And so today, that's a mixture of onboarding offline identity data. So, hashed email address is the primary key, but there are others, as well as digital identifiers. And so I think we see a lot of value in our customers when they leverage TransUnion for a graph. They're not only helping connect their data to their media platforms, which allows addressable targeting at scale, but they also benefit from the full breadth and depth of our graph, which allows them to increase the number of matches. They basically find more of their targeted individuals across the relevant platforms. And then critically, when they bring all that return path data back in on the back end of the campaign, they're able to tie it to this persistent view of a single individual or household, which allows you to then obviously measure once you've run your campaign, truly measure the effectiveness from conversion to multi-touch attribution to media mix modeling. You can look at the data in lots of different ways that helps you really understand which media placements, which creative strategies, which devices are driving the right outcome. And that's critical. So when some of these IDs go away, I think we see a doubling down of investment on first-party identity, as well as more second-party data collaboration, because now you need to connect your data to your partners, and you need to do that at scale. And so we're seeing clean rooms emerge as a technical environment for two or more parties to join their identities in a way that is privacy safe and commercially safe, such that they can maintain addressable targeting. So anyway, there's quite a lot there. There's a few different strategies. There's no silver bullet, but I think ultimately it will lead to better end consumer experiences if we're lucky.
Great. So we're coming up to the bottom of the show here. And Gareth, we ask every guest the same question, at the end of the show. If you were to replay this conversation or have a similar conversation with anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
That's a good one. As a Nike fan who is also hugely impressed by the degree of personalization in their marketing and communication strategy, I think the CMO of Nike would be at the top of my list, not only for how they've built their digital footprint, but how they're thinking about the changes ahead and the infrastructure and the tools that they're building in their business to remain customer-centric. I think would be a great conversation.
Yeah, that's great. And on my list of shows to watch is the new Michael Jordan Air documentary around really how he made the brand, and it's pretty amazing, what they've done now that they've really taken that to the next level around one-to-one personalization and a truly omnichannel approach. It's really just pretty remarkable what the brand has done in the last 20 plus years there.
If you haven't read already, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, I highly recommend it. It's a great business book, but it touches on these themes, and it's just a good story of an accomplished life. So check it out.
Great. Well, we're really just summing things up. First, Gareth, thank you for coming on. When I sort of take a step back and think about what we covered today, a proper identity strategy affects some critical business outcomes. Understanding your customers, targeting your customers in an omnichannel way, and then really prospecting and acquiring net new. Gareth, you said something that really resonated with me, and certainly Simon Data as a CDP. Every one of our customers are hyper focused around their first party data strategy. But one of the things that I think you really touched on, and I think is critical to underscore with the changing third-party data and cookie environment, is how activating your first-party data really, relies ultimately in joining that into third-party data. And thinking about, what is this world of cloud-enabled data? How does this look like as cookies start disappearing? As your first-party data strategy starts, playing more and more, importance. How can what are the right partners? What are the right technologies? What are the right data providers? To help really join that core customer data you have today. To your point, the best data strategies are one that are rooted in truly understanding your customers. Ideally having a logged-in experience if possible. And then how do you use that to expand? And really fill in the gaps around what you understand relative to your customers today. And it's really great to hear what you and TransUnion are doing around this and have done over the past years. So with that, maybe you can, for any of our customers who want to learn more about you, about TransUnion, and what you guys do, how can they find you?
So check out transunion.com and then check out True Audience, which is our marketing suite of products. And so it's all there. If not, you can get me Gareth.Davies at team.newstar. Reach out to me directly. Hit me up on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to have any part of this conversation with any of your listeners offline, and excited to see as we, I think just to echo your last point, the more marketers and their enterprise IT and data counterparts build that really robust first-party data footprint, the more leverage they're going to have, the more able they are to drive more effective omni-channel campaigns that drive delightful consumer experiences and measure the outcomes. And so I think, we all benefit if that world comes into existence. And certainly, as we build more integrations into the cloud across CDPs, making it seamless and frictionless to connect that data, that should not be a laborious challenge. It should be turnkey, safe and secure to be able to connect that data in the CDP, in the cloud data warehouse, and bridge it to second and third party data so you can activate and measure. And so we're certainly playing our part in making that world possible. And we hope to see more modularity, more interoperability across the vendor ecosystem as folks make it just far more easy, because there's enough challenges out there for marketers as it is. Stitching data together and maintaining a privacy safe view of identity should not be one of those. It should be just much easier than it is. So we're excited to be already making that happen and look forward to more collaboration in the future.
Great. It's great to hear, Gareth. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlock podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.